Hi everyone. Choosing to come to Ohio Wesleyan was choosing a global connection, as I'm sure all of my fellow peers here know. Tonight brings a large group of musical activists and leaders in one of the most powerful movements in history to our table right now. We have Thom Shanker, Serj Tankian, and Graham Nash. Growing up in a Catholic elementary school, I struggled a lot finding my personal place in the world. A lot of other social issues and global issues Catholic school didn't really teach me about. However, music did. First, I found 90s and early 2000s alternative. And then along high school, my early high school career, my mom passed down all of her records from when she was in college and high school. With that, she passed down decades of Riot Girl and Pussy Riot music to me. And that's where I really found my love for feminism, anti-war, anti-violence music, where we're just looking for peace and we're looking for equality in the world. And that's just what we're here to talk about tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, Sid. That was from Sid Johnson, who's a first-year student here at Ohio Wesleyan. I'm Professor Sean Kay, and I'm very, very excited. I don't think our guests need very much introduction at all, so I will just move straight to things. But we are very fortunate to have two of America's most important artists, in my opinion, of the last half century, and one of our most important chroniclers of the impact of rock and roll on the ground, with Thom Shanker from the New York Times, Serj Tankian of System of a Down, and Graham Nash from the Hollies, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And both also have had incredibly powerful solo careers and are great writers, poets, entertainers, and people. So it's a great, great opportunity for us here tonight. Rock and roll is not just a music form. It's an attitude, it's an ethic, and it speaks truth to power. It brings people of all stripes together, and it sets agendas, and it takes us to 11. So let's get going. Graham, well, I'd like to start with you. First, some big picture stuff. In your autobiography, Wild Tales, you talk about justice and where you first got your impressions of justice and injustice. It formed very early with regard to your father, you write about. I would posit, first I'd like to ask you to elaborate on that a bit, and then also ask you about the freedom inherent in the early music you did, just the dancing, the power that came with that. And then a third part of that question, if I could, is what turned you more towards direct intent in writing with regard to making rock and roll part of your social consciousness in your career?
When I was, I think, 14 years old, the police came to my door in the small two-up, two-down house that I lived in with my family. Incredibly strange to have the police knocking on the door, wondering what it was. And my father had given me a camera that he had bought from a friend of his at work. And the policeman said that they could prove that the camera had been stolen, and who was it that gave the camera, sold the camera to my father. I'm sure it's the same all over the world. You don't tell the police anything. You don't grass on your friends to the police. It just never happens. And they took him away and they put him in jail for a year. And I'd written a song about it called The Prison Song. I was in Manchester on Granada television. I was singing the prison song live. And on tape, this is unbelievable, on tape was the judge that sentenced my father to prison. I couldn't talk to him because his part was on tape. He was already pre-interviewed. But I thought it was incredibly coincidental that this man was on the same show as me when I'm singing the prison song about him sending my father to jail. It was a strange moment for me. I came to live in America in December of 1968. I had learned with my time with the Hollies to be able to write a melody that was, if you heard it 2 or 3 times, you could probably whistle it back to me, those kind of melodies. And when I saw David and Stephen and Neil and Joni, I was living with Joni at the time, when I realized what they were doing with their lyrics and the marriage of their lyrics with their melodies, I began to realize that if I could take what I had learned from the Hollies about writing unforgettable melodies and put more decent words to them, my songs would be better. I would be talking about real things. Carrie Ann, Bus Stop, all those kind of songs, nice pop songs, God bless them, I love them dearly, not very profound. So having been set the example by David and Stephen and Neil and Joan, I started to write better songs. And that's how I'm talking to you right now, as a matter of fact.
Excellent.
And the third part of your question was about...
that was it. You covered, when did you make that turn, in effect, towards, yeah.
The Hollies had written a song in, I think, the end of 1964 called Too Many People, which was about the population explosion and what are we going to do with all these people? And since that moment, since I wrote that, another billion people have been born, and are still demanding food and demanding equal rights, et cetera, et cetera. It's a crazy, crazy world. I've been an American citizen for over 40 years. I'm very proud to be here. I am still here. I just hope he doesn't get reelected.
Well, we'll have a chance to come back to all that, and thank you, and we'll have some specific songs to also reference too. Let me take that then to Serj Tankian. I've often heard artists like yourselves referred to as modern troubadours, sort of sounding the alarm bell for society. Could you give us your perspective on how you see artists today speaking truth to power, advancing change? Is rock and roll sort of unique in its association to expressing social change? I mean, what makes it special in that regard, Serj?
Personally, first of all, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Graham and Thom, for this incredible, repartee and ability to share all this stuff. Personally, my activism was there before my music, before me being an artist. So it was a natural kind of hybrid, thing that worked out. I was listening to Graham talk about writing amazing pop songs that weren't necessarily the height of profundity before he started writing with more kind of intention and whatnot. I think both are important. I think we need to dance. Dancing is a beautiful thing. I think we need to lighten things up. And I think with dancing and everything going on that people are very into, but I think being able to speak through music with positive, strong intentions is a unique and beautiful gift. And rock music, to answer your question more directly, has it's the genre of revolution. It's the genre of revolt. It's a teenager's natural kind of tendency when all of the cells are acting up and to me it's the natural form of speaking truth to power. You use classical music to portray other more vulnerable beautiful scenarios. Jazz music has its own sexy vibe and also other ways of, but rock is the way to really kind of land it, and make those statements.
And Thom Shanker, you as a young journalist cut your teeth in the Soviet Union just as it was beginning to collapse. What did you find there in terms of underground rock bands, and how did that, not in the Cold War in the Soviet Union, but how did it play a part? What was the dynamic?
It certainly did, and also let me just echo Serj in saying thanks to you and Graham and Serj for allowing me to be part of this incredible conversation. And it's true, Sean, you and I have talked about this. Rock and roll did not bring down the Soviet totalitarian system. It collapsed on its own political contradictions and economic failures and the yearning of a population for freedom, as all people do. It was the brittleness of the rule of terror that finally cracked. But all of these movements, the underground rock scene I covered in Leningrad, the dissident movement, the refusnik movement, they were asking questions and they were saying, shouldn't there be a different way to live? And most importantly and inspiring, the underground rockers, they didn't get to record with Melodia, they didn't get to perform in the big concerts, but they proved that you can live freely in a totalitarian society inside your head, in your living room with a guitar, with your friends around you, in pop-up concerts. I mean, snap concerts are very common now, but that was how they used to perform back then. And even in a communist state, and their lyrics were not especially or overtly political, but the way they lived their lives was political every minute of the day.
And how would you look at today, in a contemporary sense, activists like Pussy Riot, which certainly are a unique kind of music, but carry the rock and roll ethic of protest and speaking truth to power? How do you account for them?
Sure, certainly to a new level. And once again, I mean, Pussy Riot is more of a performance art group than a rock band per se, but they use the guitars and drums and bass because those tropes resonate. They get the sound out. And unlike the underground rockers of the late Gorbachev era in Leningrad, Pussy Riot is completely and overtly political. They are challenging Putin's authority. They are challenging, the crushing rule of Putin's society and even the church. And they are paying a price. They've gone to prison. They are incredibly courageous. They are living a First Amendment belief that people should be able to speak out any way they choose, even in Putin's Russia.
It's interesting, Putin tried to co-opt one of the artists you covered, Boris Grebenshchikov, with regard to Ukraine, tapping into nationalism. But he pushed back and said, I've seen the generals, they drink and eat our death. He didn't appreciate being used by the government that way.
Right. No, it's true. And he did push back. It's very courageous, as often happens with, American and British composers whose songs are picked up by a politician or another, and that they shouldn't. And it's also just really an amazing footnote that 30 years after the death of Victor Tsoi, the front man for the group Kino, another one of these very important groups, his song has become the unofficial anthem of the protest in Belarus. I mean, his song, it's Hochu Paramen, it's literally, I want change, normally translated as we're waiting for change, but that song is now being sung on the streets of Minsk 30 years after Victor Tsoi wrote it for a group of
Now, Serj, actually, let me go to Graham. Graham, right about the same time that Thom was experiencing that, the Berlin Wall comes down. And you have a song called Chipping Away that you literally are there at the Berlin Wall, chipping away at it, playing your song for the Berliners as it's coming down. How did that happen, and what did that mean for you in the arc of your presence as an artist?
You can't build a wall against ideas. Ideas seem to go completely through a wall, or over it, or under it, or whichever way. You can't build a wall against ideas. CSN had been doing a show at the General Assembly building here at the United Nations in New York. It was an incredible moment to be standing at that podium where Khrushchev slammed his shoes on, attacking Eisenhower. It was an incredible day. And then at the end of the concert, Stephen comes up to us and he says, this wall is coming down. We should be there. And we all said, yep, we should be there. How do we do that? And because we were in New York, right? Normally we were in Los Angeles. So we're kind of out of our depth. Stephen talked to Ahmet Erdogan, our dear friend from Atlantic Records. He gave us the money. We flew to Berlin, and there we were, chipping away at that wall. And what happened is, it was very strange because we didn't have any instruments or microphones or any of that kind of stuff. It was just a bare stage out of the Berlin Wall. But what had happened is we had done an interview the day before when we arrived, and I had this idea, and I said, why doesn't the radio station at exactly 4:10 in the afternoon, play Chipping Away. We will ask all the people to bring their little transistor radios and play it, and we will sing to their sound. And that's what we did. So we did Chipping Away, no instruments, just singing to all these hundreds of thousands of people with transistor radios in their hands. What an incredible moment. Because you can't build a wall against ideas. The moment that the East Germans saw what the West Berliners were wearing and eating and looking at and reading and taking pictures with, they wanted it. The wall came down.
Yes, very, very good. And drawing out of that, Serj, of course, Armenia also comes out of that Soviet experience. And you have a lot of activism in your career that draws from your and your bandmates' Armenian heritage. And that translates even more broadly into human rights issues. For those who need to hear about that issue, could you give us the quick sort of backdrop and talk a bit about your activism and why the issue of the recognition of the Armenian genocide is such a critical thing today?
My grandparents were survivors of the genocide. We grew up with the stories of how they survived the horrific things that they saw with the killing of their family in front of their eyes in a lot of cases. So we knew the truth of what our history was, our family history, our nation's history was, and living in a well-known democracy like the US, where the word genocide was a taboo in congressional hearings, coming from presidents because of Turkey being a NATO ally, because of weapons transfers, weapons sales, economic entanglements, etc. It made me an activist for life, because it made me think, if this is a truth that's being pushed under the rug because of geopolitical or political capital or other reasons, how many truths are there that are being denied openly because of wealth, because of profit, because of these things? And that really made me an activist. Armenia became independent from the Soviet Union in '91, along with most of the Soviet socialist republics. For 25 or so years, it had a kind of a typical post-Soviet oligarchic, monopolistic, greedy regime that really, really punished the people, and a lot of people were leaving the country up until 2 years ago, where Armenia had this most glamorous, beautiful, peaceful velvet revolution that occurred in 2018. And it's been completely corruption, president that is being incriminated. A lot of people are going to jail, and the country's basically economically starting to do much better. Tourism's up, everything's up, all the numbers are up. If you look at index reports. So I'm really, really proud of that, seeing something like that. And the lesson learned from that is very unique as well. We actually made a film, a documentary film called I Am Not Alone, that's going to be released by a large streaming service within 3-4 months. I can't name it due to confidentiality agreements, but you'll know it. It's a fabulous film that shows how decentralized civil disobedience used and along with Facebook Live and social media created a situation where they overwhelmed the authorities. The government was not able to contain it because they weren't fighting in one square all together, hundreds of thousands of people, although they were doing that as well. But they were literally fighting the battle in an almost funny, naughty, cultural way by running around and closing any road that existed. So if you lived an hour outside of the capital, you close the road where you are with your friends. And when the police come, you run away. And then they have to come back because you're closing the road again. And everyone kept on doing this throughout the country until the system collapsed, until the regime capitulated, which is a beautiful story. Not one bullet fired, not one person died.
It seems also, as a follow-up, that the truth of the Armenian genocide is even especially critical now, given the drift towards more authoritarianism in Turkey also.
And how about China?
And China too, yes, yes. So I'll leave that as a comment. Serj, let me follow up very quickly. I asked Graham about justice, and you told me before that justice is tied to our moral fabric. Justice is the only way to have an equitable democracy. Without justice, none of the principles that we hold dear as a nation are going to last. How do you think about that right now? And I'd ask that of Graham too, about, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, how do you see that in this larger perspective of what we've been discussing? Perhaps Graham first, and then Serj, since.
I think when people get upset and march en masse, protesting peacefully, it gets work done. President Trump has made such an incredible mess of even trying to explain what's going on. Did you see, by the way, that Glenn Kirshner just accused Trump of second-degree murder? Wow. Anyway, when people get together, they have tremendous power. It's been shown throughout the ages. When people get together, they have tremendous power. And we have to do the same now. You know, when Serj was talking about the Armenian genocide, it's happening now in China. It's happening in other countries in the world. It's prevalent today. And that's why it's important to keep remembering what happened and try and learn from it. Because of course, if we don't learn from it, we're bound to repeat it. But when people get together and get together through music, so that you can shake your ass and you can think at the same time, things start to happen. The Black Lives Matter is a perfect example. It's a very peaceful protest. It's not going to be made out that way by the Trump administration because that's not what they want. They don't want peace, they want chaos. And it's going to be a very interesting couple of months coming up. Very, very interesting. I've never seen it quite this crazy.
Serj, your band was singing about like prisons and things like that long before it was covered in the mainstream media even. How do you follow up with that question that Graham just addressed?
So for years, I've been interested in the intersection of justice and spirituality. And a number of years ago, in fact, I'm thinking about writing a book about it. And a number of years ago, I had the auspicious honor of meeting the Dalai Lama. And for a film, and I had to ask him 2 questions on camera, and that was one of the questions I asked him: what is the intersection of justice and spirituality? After thinking about it for a second, he basically said, to follow a path of injustice would be spiritually extremely uncomfortable. I think what's happening around the world now, not just in the United States with the BLM movement, but in Belarus, in South America, a number of nations in South, you're seeing this all around the world. Young people are no longer tolerant of the BS of oppressive regimes, the BS of the idea that economies can grow unsustainably and indefinitely as a hallmark of our progress. And they're revolting. Our environmental extinction looming based on our inability to change our lifestyle, young people know that better than we do in our age. I mean, we know it, but they feel it. They're born with that. And I think they are not putting up with it. And over the next 3-4 years, I feel like we are going to see dramatic change around the world in terms of leadership, in terms of systems, in terms of living lifestyle, and that we learn, we blame our lockdowns in COVID and the disease to really understand our place on this planet and not just go back to normal, which in my opinion is extinction.
Let's, Graham, let me dig deeper with you. You have a song that really resonated with me called Burning for the Buddha that you wrote in recent years. And when we talked before, you spoke about how hard it is to write a song like that. Could you elaborate a little bit on that process?
Yeah, it was a song that David's son, James Raymond, and I wrote together. In doing montages with the computers very early on in the mid-'80s, I used an image of the monk that had burned himself to death to protest the Vietnam War. And I doubled it up and I mirrored it and I put Nixon in there and I put fire and war and stuff. It was a thing I was working on. But then I heard that in the last, I think in the last 12 years, about 80,000 Tibetan monks have burned themselves to death. Think about that for a moment. For their love of Buddha, in this particular case, they would give up their lives to make an incredible statement. And when I heard that, obviously I'm a songwriter, you know, I have to, and I dwell on things and I think about it and I have to figure out how do we turn this into an acceptable form of poetry that can get the point across while still, you know, being a rock and roll song. And so Burning for the Buddha was a fabulous experience for me to write that with James. He's not only an incredible keyboard player, but a wonderful person.
Yes. Let me draw one more, because this was a moment of very big change, Thom Shanker, when you were in the Soviet Union as it was collapsing. And a couple questions for each of you, or one for each of you, about actually about environmental issues. Thom, when you were there, Chernobyl happened. And we talked earlier, and you talked about how that impacted, of course, the system at the time, but also that there was some musical kind of, well, I'm about to use the word fallout, unfortunately, with regard to that, but you understand what I'm saying.
Sure. I mean, there's an amazing historic footnote. I was in Leningrad in April of 1986 when the reactor blew. I was there to cover the triumphant return of Vladimir Horowitz, one of the greatest piano players who ever lived. And he had left as a fan, and he'd always wanted to return, couldn't, and finally did. And it was hero worship for him. And the present the Soviet government gave him was a radioactive cloud passing over that part of Russia, literally while he was performing, while my wife and I were in the Central Concert Hall in Leningrad. We didn't know about it for a couple of days, of course, because of the repressive nature of the Soviet Union's total control of truth. But to your very good question, Sean, it was interesting. A lot of the Soviet citizens who were afraid to protest lack of freedom of speech, lack of religious choice, lack of consumer goods, lack of the ability to travel and go where they wanted. This touched them deeply because all people are connected to the earth, and the Russian people too. They love to go mushrooming on the weekend and cross-country skiing and all that. And the fact that their government lied to them about a near apocalyptic nuclear accident somehow made a lot of people question authority who wouldn't have otherwise. There was no such thing as a silent majority in the Soviet Union. There isn't in any authoritarian system. But the dissidents, the refuseniks, the underground artists, they were already there. But Chernobyl, I think, did as much as anything to prove to a vast, large percentage of the Soviet population that their government was corrupt.
And Graham, I first started listening to you when I really noticed you were singing a lot about the environment. And at a time when not a lot of artists were. In fact, you were a co-organizer of the No Nukes concert, which was one of the very first major, after the concert for Bangladesh, I think yours was one of the most early kind of activist concerts like that. And your songs like To the Last Whale. What would you say about the environmental movement today and the challenges to it?
I think that we're facing the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. And I know we're in the middle of COVID-19. I know it all. I know all of that. Climate change will eat us. Everyone says, you know, we got to save the planet. This planet does not care about us 1 second. If every single human being dropped dead in this moment, the entire planet would keep on spinning for a few million years and another life form will arise. It's our biggest challenge. And we have a president who is putting people in charge of our climate that don't believe in climate change, do not believe that human beings are causing this, do not believe that CO2 in the atmosphere is creating this. We have the leaders of our country that don't believe in climate change. We're in deep shit.
And Serj, similar question to you. Songs like Toxicity, especially Harakiri, the whole record, but the song itself and the video you did with it too is incredibly important visual. And I love how it starts with a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. In fact, you know, transcendental poets have a lot to tell us today, actually, it turns out. And the quote is that the human race will eventually die of civilization. How do you see the relationship between intent in your music and advancing environmental progress?
You know, the more I've had my eyes open to our impending, you know, environmental fate, I guess, you know, the more it's become, as Graham said, it's our biggest challenge, you know. And for me, it's very important to kind of talk about it. It's something I think about often, because it's a holistic thing. It puts everything together. All our human rights advances and retractions, all of our animal rights issues, all of our, you know, if you put it within the scope of climate change, it almost kind of encircles it all. It's like the holistic way of looking at it. And we see that we definitely have a climate crisis, and yet, you know, our Cro-Magnon brains have not advanced in some degree to be able to even admit it for some people, like the president and some of his cohorts. It is a very dangerous situation. I think Noam Chomsky named the Republican Party the most dangerous party in history due to climate change, more than the Nazi Party, because the Nazi Party was exterminating, you know, groups of people en masse, of course, but the Republican Party's inability to recognize climate change it's exterminating in terms of humanity. I think it's a very important issue to, you know, talk about, and the songs just come, just like Graham said. I think when you think about something, that muse is out there in the universe, and as a presenter, as an artist, as a songwriter, it comes to you and you talk about it. And the intentions are very important, Sean. I think, you know, two people can do the same action, one might have, you know, maybe the action is not a good action, but one might be accidental and the other might be, you know, nefarious. And that makes a difference to me. It's not just the action, but the intent makes a big difference. And when you listen to great music that's moving, that is social, that creates social awareness, you don't even have to completely listen to the words. Like when I first heard Rage Against the Machine, my friend Tom Morello, obviously the guitars, I didn't understand Zach's lyrics immediately. It took me a second to understand them, but I felt the power of them. I felt what they were trying to say, irrespective of not understanding the exact linguistic content. I think, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. By the way, you've got an audio book coming out, My Cool Gardens. Is that related in a sense?
Cool Gardens is a poetry book that I wrote in, I want to say 2001, 2002, that I published, self-published at first, and then it got picked up for a second edition by Simon & Schuster. And then, but we had never put out an audiobook. So I decided last year to just basically get on the mic when I had a little time in the studio and kind of, you know, bang them out. And now we're putting it out as an audiobook, yeah.
Well, and I mentioned before Graham's autobiography, Wild Tales. There's a special genre of books like this, and I know we'll get one from you at some point, Serj. But Graham, you've heard me say this before. Yours is, in my opinion, the hallmark among those books. It's incredibly well written, and I recommend everyone take a look at it, and even get it at your local library if you have to.
I just wanted to make it sound like I was in your kitchen having a cup of tea with you.
Yeah, it's very well done. Thank you for it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Graham, let me go back to you now. Let's shift to a next category here, songs of war and peace. can you give us a sense of your music relative to those issues? We all know, of course, I'm here in Ohio, and I went to Kent State as an undergraduate and for my master's degree. I was even a member of the May 4th task force there, and played music myself at the various ceremonies on the anniversary for about 5 years back. We had to march because the governor wanted to build a gymnasium over the site where the students were shot by their government for exercising their First Amendment rights. Anyway, your iconic songs like that you did with your band, like Ohio, Military Madness, these really resonate today.
Because it's still happening today.
Well, I was going to ask you, for example, what happened in front of the White House in June. How did you feel when you saw that?
It was the same. It was the same thing. People standing up peacefully trying to protest and being, bulldozed and tear gassed and pepper bombed by their own police force. When Trump wanted to clear the square to have that fake, meeting with the upside down Bible in front of that church. And he cleared all the people out there. It's the same thing as Ohio. Now, nobody got killed during that, but the principle is the same. When Neil Young saw the picture of the Kent State student lying dead on the floor, and he showed it to Neil, and he watched Neil write Ohio, he calls me. I'm in Los Angeles, right there up in Northern California. He calls me, he goes, Nash, book the studio, book Halverson, book the band, book all the tape you want. We're coming down, get it ready for tomorrow. I said, great. Why? He says, wait until you hear this song that Neil has just written.
And Teach Your Children was going up the charts at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, Teach Your Children going up into the top 20, yeah. When we finished recording Ohio, we did it in about 3 takes. We realized we wanted it as a single, so we needed a B-side. So we did Find the Cost of Freedom, which Stephen wrote, and we sang that 2 or 3 times, and that was done. We mixed it and gave it to Ahmed Erdogan, who was at the session. And we said to Ahmed, we want this out right now. And he, like you said, he says to me, hey, wait a second. You've got Teach Your Children going up into the top 20. What do you want to do? And we said, kill it. We don't care. And we put it out. I think it took us about just over 12 days to get it from recording to the street. And the initial artwork for the 45 single was a copy of the Constitution of the United States with 4 bullet holes in it. And on today.
And I saw you some years ago performing Military Madness and thinking you're delivering this with the same passion that I saw you delivering it, in the early 70s.
That's because there were many more wars than there were when I first wrote that. When I first wrote that, it was about my father going off to World War II. And now look, there's a dozen wars going on throughout the world. Right now, as you and I are speaking, people are getting slaughtered. We don't learn from history, kid. We just don't.
But yet those songs like Chicago or Military Madness are still very part of our current dynamic.
Because it's still happening now.
Yeah.
We have to be very careful. We have to be very careful. I mean, it's easy to look at the television, and you look at Rachel Maddow and she says, our democracy could be in danger of dying, But listen to what she's saying. And she's right. Trump is way too close to Putin and to, Erdogan and to Duterte and to Kim Jong-un. He wants to be them. And he wants to turn this country into what's happening in the Soviet Union. We can't let him do that. A lot of people, here's what happened. In 2016, 48% of the people that could vote did not vote. Now, they may have thought, Hillary's got it. I don't have to vote, she's got this. Maybe it's snowing and I don't want to go out. But 48% of the people didn't vote, and look what we got. We have to get out. We have to replace this man. Not everybody in the world likes Joe Biden. I understand that. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with him. He is 1,000 million times better than Donald Trump for us. We need to make a change.
Serj, thank you, Graham. Serj, likewise, System of a Down was high on the charts when 9/11 happened. And then you got criticized for it. It got pulled off the radio in some places, but you stayed the course. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of taking a major stance when it's against the grain of the popular mood? And also, beyond offering a rallying cry of dissent, do you feel in particular the song BYOB had a significant impact in shaping the discourse over the war?
So when 9/11 happened, that week we were releasing our second record, the self-righteous suicide. So if you'll remember well at the time that the conglomerate that ran a lot of radio stations around the country basically started taking down songs. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles was taken down because it had
Imagine?
Imagine,
right, yeah, totally. So our songs were definitely taken down along with the whole repertoire for Rage Against the Machine and so many other things. And this is when we're launching a single. And that week we still had, the week of September 11, we still had the #1 record in the country with our new, irrespective of us not being on the radio. And I remember a day after 9/11, I had written a piece called Understanding Oil. It was a piece that I posted to the band's website, trying to basically discourage unilateralism and revenge as a form of getting back, and instead having a weighted, smart, figuring out who did this, how they did it, and using a multilateral approach, be it through the UN or other agencies, to go after them, talking about Israel and Palestine, the lopsidedness of American foreign policy within the last 50 years, basically standing behind brutal despots instead of real democracies and whatnot, the whole South American situation, Pinochet, Kissingerism, whatever you want to call it, and brought it into the light of 9/11, saying this is a horrible event, but we have to understand what this is tied to. This is not just some event coming out of nowhere and happening. This is tied to many things that our government has done over the last 50 years since World War II, etc. And man, we got death threats. We've got your morning hosts, just in Colorado on our first day of our tour, during this time when it was all red alert and because there might be other terrorist attacks and all of that stuff, and we're going in front of 15, 20,000 people playing every night, going, are we going to die? Is someone going to blow this up? Should I be running around more on stage in case someone's going to shoot us or whatever? Like, it was really stressful. Yes, it's very stressful talking truth to power when public opinion is not necessarily on your side. At the time, obviously, there was a lot of nationalism, reactionism, flag waving, which is fine, but intent is important. And there was a lot of fear. And it was a very difficult time to release a record, a single, speak openly, and be touring at the same time that week, So I learned a lot from it. I remember being on the Howard Stern show because he was bashing some of the stuff I said, and I was trying to explain myself without, explain myself in a certain way within a category that people can understand, if you know what that means. And it was really stressful. I mean, we're getting death threats, and the guy sat me down in the hotel room we were in, and they just looked at me and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Are you trying to kill us? And I just, my honest reaction was just, it's the truth, man. It's the fucking truth. And they're like, who cares? So I care, we care. And this is, and years later, I'm glad that I stuck by it. So it's a very tough thing. It's a very tough thing.
Graham, you and your band toured with Neil in 2006, I think it was, and quite a lot of protest music in that tour. And I remember watching a documentary. There were people in Atlanta, I think it was, walking out and saying all kinds of horrible things about Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And yet, from what we know now, the criticism was right. The war was a mistake. There's a consensus view on that. How does that make you feel in hindsight, Graham?
If you buy a ticket to a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young show, what the hell do you expect? Our shows, those in that tour, were about 3.5, 4 hours long. And only after about the third hour did we do the song that really pissed them off, which was Let's Impeach the President for Lying. They enjoyed the shit out of all the other stuff, but when we came to that song, at least 10%, 10 to 12% people walked out after that song. And they have every right to walk out. They paid for their ticket. They can do what the hell they want. But you know what? Every single one of those people that gave us the finger, that said that that we should die, that sent death threats to us. I had never been on a tour where there were bomb-sniffing dogs on the plane. I mean, we understand that people have the right to not agree with us. But I would like to ask every single one of them right now what they think of George Bush now. What do you think about him right now? What do you think about what him and Cheney did? He may be your beer guzzling buddy, but look what happened.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget. I suppose compared to the current administration, it maybe looks even better to some, but
Yes,
that war was a deep tragedy, and both of you
Isn't that
spoke truth to power.
Yeah.
Both of you did, and you were right in doing so. And so it was a very important moment. Let me ask Thom Shanker, as a documenter, as somebody who's documented these kind of things on the ground, soldier after soldier that I've talked to, either from Vietnam to Iraq, we're listening to people like Graham Nash when they were in Vietnam. They were listening to System of a Down or Rage Against the Machine when they were in Iraq as soldiers. So what role does rock and roll play for soldiers on the ground? And how do you see that as having evolved from, say, from Vietnam era into the wars that you covered as Pentagon correspondent for the New York Times?
Sure, it's a great question. I hope you'll allow me just a short journalist caveat. I know that all 156 people on the Zoom call understand that as a newsman, longtime reporter, now an editor, I'm not a composer blessed to have a muse who speaks through me, nor am I an editorial writer who writes opinion pieces. The New York Times newsroom is not for any party, not against any party. We're not the opposition. We are simply telling truth to power. And the only thing that we're partisan for, we are partisan for the First Amendment, because we get to ask questions on behalf of the American public, because they're not in the White House press room. The American public, except for their sons and daughters, are not on the ground in Iraq. So I'm there for them to tell that story fairly and without opinion. And why do we do it, Sean? Going to war is the most grim decision a democracy makes. Vast amount of treasury, sons, daughters, husbands, wives. It's up to the New York Times and all of my colleagues in what's derogatorily called the mainstream media, but which I think is a badge of honor, to ask the questions. And it was the New York Times that wrote stories a year before the invasion of Iraq. My colleague Eric Schmidt, David Sanger, and I, we were writing that President Bush is taking this country to war, even though he was saying he wasn't. There were off-ramps. We never wrote stories that put troops at risk, but we wanted the democracy of America to know what the government was doing in its name. And that's our role in this process, as a complement to the artists and the musicians and the politicians, each of whom have their role in society. But it's fascinating how the troops consume music. You know, from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, it was a communal experience. Everybody had radios, listening to Armed Forces Network. There was a community of music. And while the internet is a wonderful thing, of course, in linking the world, it also is a very individual and even isolating experience. When I'd be embedded for months at a time with the troops in Iraq, maybe they'd listen to music in onesies and twosies, but it's mostly individual with their headphones on. You'd have System of a Down, this soldier in that cot. Next to him, who knows, George Strait, or Miley Cyrus. Next cot, would be ludicrous. So the music is still very, very important, but it's no longer a communal or collective experience. It's individual, and there's no Adrian Cronauer speaking for the collective deployed force, saying good morning Baghdad. And that's kind of the loss.
Did that make it harder also, though, for if individualized music is there, it would be harder actually for the military to control the message, as they tried to, as you say, during the Vietnam period.
Absolutely. And, Armed Forces Network still broadcasts, but not all that many people listen to it, really. And like the really great sort of battalions would have a super smart sergeant who had a computer that was like, even before music sharing was a thing, the soldiers were doing it with each other. So it did become a collective in that people would download all these songs. I'm sorry to Serj and Graham, they weren't paying for them as they probably should have, but they sure were listening to them a lot.
Because it's comfort food.
Yes,
when
it is.
you're stuck in the middle of a jungle and you have people firing at you, you need to get something that's comfortable. Your favorite meal, you could imagine it. But with music, you could put your headphones on and you could be there. It's comfort food for you. It's a point of contact with home. It's a point of contact with family and with the world generally. It's comfort food.
It became so important to them. People often ask me about morale of the troops and their patriotism. Mostly troops who are on the front lines fighting, they don't think about the president or the defense secretary or the service secretary. They think about the man or the woman to their left. They think about the man or the woman to their right. They think about the man or the woman who's their next commander up the chain. They think about their family. They want a hot shower at the end of patrol. They want a safe place to sleep. They want to be able to listen to the music they love and unwind, just as you said.
That's great. Thank you, Thom. I want to move to one last little round of questions, and then we'll wrap up just a few minutes after 8 o'clock for everyone. So I want to be careful for everyone's time and really appreciative of what everyone's been doing here. So, and I should say, journalists put their lives on the line frequently when they do the job that Thom is talking about. So
Thom, I have a question for you, Thom. Did you know Christopher Dickey?
Yeah, know him by reputation, not a personal friend, but of course, I'm well aware.
Yes, he just passed away. What an incredible reporter. So brave. Very, very similar to you, all over the place.
Well.
Anyway,
yes, indeed.
Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so this is back to some bigger picture questions to round this out here, put a bookend, I guess. Serj, starting with you. And I have to thank you. You're coming in from New Zealand, so it's a long internet ride. But you look and sound great, so thank you. You told me when we spoke previously a great quote that just continues to resonate with me. You said, ultimately, you can call things as they are, be they realpolitik, realist, and whatnot, and in the end, depress everyone to death. But without telling them, look, this is a choice. That's very important. Giving them the optimism to make that choice and saying it doesn't have to be this way. War is over. Or more concurrently, Black Lives Matter. How do you feel we can visualize that positive choice today? And I have a follow-up too, but perhaps start with that.
Well, John Lennon, the whole war is over concept with John and Yoko, during the Vietnam War. If you visualize war being over and you feel and think that way, that gives credence to that type of energy throughout the universe, and you're able to focus on that. And if enough people do that, then you've convinced enough of a general population in a democracy to stop that, and eventually that's what happened. Look, yes, I mean, music can be, gloom and doom, but, the reason that we're putting this out there is so people are aware. And that awareness, the awareness has a sales pitch, right? The awareness is you gotta close, and that close is to create a better world, it's to point all of these things out, pointing out we eat, makes a huge impact on carbons. The amount of travel that we do makes a huge, this is not just to feel bad that, oh shit, life's gonna end because I take too many planes. It's to go, fuck, I gotta harness this in. We have to change our lifestyle. It's to create action, ultimately, is what we're getting to here. And that is the most important aspect of activism, action.
Graham, that may be, throw that to you actually very quick also. And I recall talking with you, you were there in the room when the Beatles did All You Need Is Love for I think 1 billion people all around the world. I mean, I not so much the experience of that moment, but how true is it? All you need is love.
I think it's very true. Your life is made up of choices. You either choose to do this or that. You go this way or that way. Every decision in your life is a choice to make your life better. I got a call one Sunday morning from Paul McCartney, who told me that they were EMI and they were going to do this thing with this thing called Telstar, which was one of the very first satellites. And it was going to be broadcast through lots and lots of countries. And each country had to give their best to present what was the best of Britain. What is the best of Britain? The best of Britain right then, unquestionably, the Beatles and their music. So John had written this very simple song and he invited me down, and I went down there, dressed in my flowered, whatever the hell I was wearing in those days, and sat and watched that entire session. And it became so obvious that a simple, beautiful, musical message can be like a huge stone that you throw 100 yards into this still pond and then wait. And sooner or later, those waves will start to come and affect you. And that's what music is. That's what music does. And I'm incredibly proud to be a musician.
That's great. Thank you. I have two last questions. One's to Thom, and then back quickly to Graham very quickly. Thom and Serj, if you want to hop in on these two, please do. Thom, to follow up on the point you made just a few minutes ago, when we hear artists talk of freedom, we do also have to think of journalism. And you and your colleagues often, as I said, risk your lives to present truth. And yet you've been labeled as enemies of the people, and fake news. Enemies of the people, if I recall right, was a phrase that Stalin used. What does that mean to you as a journalist? How do we as citizens, especially as we go into an election, need to think about the information that we are processing?
Right. I mean, every American citizen has to be a smarter consumer of news. And it's just so hard, Sean, to hear that phrase, enemy of the people. I mean, I've actually been called that before. Before I departed Moscow, the Soviet newspaper, Sovietska Kultura, had a full-page denunciation of me, calling me an enemy of the people. And now to have, that phrase bandied about in my home country, a democracy that I love and that I'm proud of, is very, very painful to me. And I just wish people would understand that, and as a profession that speaks truth to power, that asks tough questions of the elected leaders on behalf of the American public, there isn't a single president who thought we gave him fair coverage. I mean, go ask George Bush's name that's come up, Barack Obama. They all thought that the New York Times was against them, just like Donald Trump does. We're not against any president. We're for the American people.
So, excellent. Let me ask one last question, and I'll target it to Graham, but I'd also like to invite Serj to comment. So Graham, many of us here watching, are teachers, professors, students. My wife is a teacher. I think I can speak for all of us to simply say thank you for your song, Teach Your Children. It's one of the most beautiful, most poignant lyrics and pieces of music ever done. So thank you. You told me once about what you do and the passion you bring to it. You said, similar to what you just said, I've got to think that I can help make the world a better place for myself and my family and my friends, Everything starts inside, doesn't it? How far can the ripples go once you throw that stone into the pool?
Mm.
And yet there's a lot of despair today. There's a lot of worry and concern. And you have been, Graham, and Serj, you are also today, both of you today, voices of idealism also for generations. And the ripples that you've thrown resonate very strongly in people's hearts. So what is your basic message? I'll ask you first, Graham, and then Serj to follow in. What is your basic message now of optimism and idealism for the future as we confront these challenges and continue to see those ripples spread throughout the pond?
I think it's quite simple for me. I have to listen to my heart. When I was growing up, my mother said, you know what, you're a good kid, you've got a good heart, just listen to your heart, you'll do okay. And as I said before, life is made up of choices. And your heart knows what is right, and your heart knows what is wrong. And if you listen carefully enough, you will make the right choice. That's what music helps to do. That's what helps bring all these people throughout the world together with a common voice. We want a better world. We don't want to get rid of you or do this. We want a better world for ourselves and for our children and for our grandchildren. Ad infinitum. We want a better world. That's what we want.
And that song you wrote really helps. So thank you. Serj, I'll give you the final optimism for the future.
I always thought when people say that ultimately life will be decided between good and evil, I always thought the main differentiation of people in the world isn't good and evil. We all have a good and evil within us. I think the main differentiation of people are those that are able to open a door for someone else and those that don't. That is really, if you believe that we're all interconnected, that's one way of living. And if you don't believe that, that's another way of living. And so the more that we realize our interconnection to each other, to nature, to everything around us, I think the more that we will see a positive light, the more that we will be able to do for each other what we need to do. Because just like COVID, I think climate crisis and everything that we're facing require us to do it together. We can't do it as separate nations. We can't do it as separate people. It doesn't work that way. We're on one planet, and it's all shared. Borders are all post-war, not recognized by treaty. We have to drop this bullshit. And I want to thank Thom and Graham and yourself, Sean. But I want to say something to Thom that I feel so bad, because what I'm seeing is the disintegration of respect for the truth. And you're in an industry of that truth. And it pisses me off more than anything that I deal with, this whole fake news and the inability. And that's where education comes in. That, I think the decline in public education in numerous countries around the world, well-known democracies, I would point as the primary culprit of our state of ignoramus with ignoramus leaders.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I think we've run the gamut in about an hour here, so I can't even begin to tell you how nice it is to see you all, even though we're separated by oceans and faraway places. Serj, your music has struck a chord, and with me, I was a big NATO person and always thought the real politic on Turkey until we talked, and I've changed my tune, and thanks to you and your tune, so I appreciate it. And Graham, as I told you, you've inspired generations with your art and your music, and Thom, you are a hero for what you do. So on behalf of
bringing us all together. Thank you, Sean.
Oh, well, thank you, Graham. That means a lot to me. Thank you. Well, on behalf of our audience, I tried to integrate questions as I got in advance as I could. And thank you, Sid, for our introduction. Thank you all for making your time. And on behalf of Ohio Wesleyan and our community here, it really means a lot that you are present with us. So thank you. Thank you all. And we'll sign off now and wish everyone the best.
Peace.
Peace, everyone.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.